Now, representation in writing has often been limited, especially in fantasy and science fiction. But representation in writing has always been important to you. You've spoken about it a number of times, and it's extremely evident in your own writing. How have you seen representation change over the last few decades since you've started writing?
Uh, the best way to see yourself reflected as the protagonist or main character of a story has always been to write it yourself. So if you open a fantasy novel and it's full of old white guys doing things to other old white guys, that's usually because old white guys wrote it. And that's nobody's fault. That happened. Um, None of you guys, I'm talking to the students now, not your teacher. None of you guys are old enough to know what the world was like post Second World War. I was born in the 50s. I grew up in the 60s. All of our teachers, most of our elected officials, all of our policemen, doctors, et cetera, were old white guys because after the war, all the people who survived and who'd fought in the war or served and came home, and they had to find jobs. So this huge pool of them took all the jobs, and they hadn't died of old age yet. They were still around, albeit reaching retirement age, when I was a young student. And so we were dominated by old white guys. Now, the underpaid professions, and I started working in public libraries because, hey, you get to work with books. Now, librarians, that was a woman's profession, so there were only two men in the building. The library I work in right now, I'm the only male they've ever hired since 1759 when the library started. All my coworkers, my bosses are all women. And over the years, as Canada became more and more of a destination for immigration from other countries in the Commonwealth, you started to see people with different skin colors all around you. And I happened to grow up in Don Mills, which was a very rich Toronto, well, North York at the time, a suburb. But in those days, we had the Auto Pact. We didn't have a free trade deal. So all foreign companies had to have little branch plant Canadian operations. So if you were a German engineering giant like Siemens, you had Siemens Canada. Well, a lot of them had corporate headquarters in Toronto. And a lot of these executives lived in Don Mills for 2 or 3 years. They'd be parachuted in to live with their wives and families. They would run the company, and then they'd move on to somewhere else in the same company, and somebody else would come in and run the Canadian. So when I went to school, it was like a United Nations. We had people from all over the world. So that it didn't seem unusual to me to have classmates of all skin colors, all cultures, both genders. And I'll tell you what, when you're that age, more of the girls in class are more eloquent than most of the guys in class anyway. They want to talk up. They put themselves forward. They accomplish stuff. So they became the leaders when we were doing class projects. We were working together. So I expected out in the workplace to have women as bosses. And sure enough, working in a library, I did. So I naturally grew up thinking, okay, if you need something done, something difficult done, the woman will always know. They're the competent ones. So that I started putting into my fiction because that was what seemed normal to me. And that's the old write what you know. And it just seems odd to me that other people thought differently. But that it's not that odd because that's what our stories are rooted in. The differences between how people think and act, the positions they take. And any story is essentially about conflict. And if you're not going to reduce the conflict to man fights monster, monster bad, monster going to eat man if man doesn't kill monster first, if you're moving up from that level, then all the conflict is either going to be physical conflict, like people hitting each other, shooting each other, stabbing each other, whatever, or it's going to be the clash of ideas, the clash of I want something, you want something, only one of us can have it, it's going to be me, or whatever, and so you want your stories to be rooted in conflict. So you're going to have people with different agendas and different wants clashing with each other, but you don't have to turn it into simplified racism, as in white on black or whatever, or man on woman. You want to make everything different. That's what makes stories interesting, having characters different and having characters that are multi-leveled and faceted. It's fun to write a mustache twirling villain, but if that's all the character is, a guy with a top hat who ties ladies to railroad tracks, okay. No, he's a lot more interesting if he also has a pet cat that he really likes. And by the way, he's got this great recipe for goldfish. So that's why he steals goldfish out of kids' fish tanks, because he's going to eat them. Why would he do that? Okay, he's already way more interesting than when we started talking about him, because he's got more layers to him. You want all your characters to be that way. So the more diverse characters are, if you're writing a murder mystery, immediately it's a better mystery, because you know that the author isn't going to go, see that black person over there? They're the villain automatically. No, anybody in the story can be the villain. Anybody in the story can be the murderer. So all of a sudden, your narrative is way more interesting. And it's also more like real life. And we feel better because actually, when you're telling a story, one of the things in the story, even if the story is full of horrible things happening, a fight to save the world, to save the universe, you want to have characters that you want to spend time in the company of. The most enduring franchises, the most enduring fictional series, it's because we want to open another book or go and pay money to see another movie to see our favorite characters do things again. We've just seen this phenomenon of The Mandalorian and Baby Yoda. Well, those are rooted in people wanting to see what happens next to those characters because the characters are attractive. The background, they already know. Oh yeah, it's the universe. Lots of different planets. Guys in spaceships shooting each other out of the sky. Yeah, we've done that. We've done that in what, 12 movies now? 14 movies. So that's old hat. What's new is these particular characters.